From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Our top story tonight. A new analysis shows that over 700 of the world's largest companies collectively made $1 trillion in windfall profits during a global cost of living crisis. Food and beverage companies, banks, big pharma, and major retailers benefited from the rise in prices in 2021 and 2022. The analysis by Oxfam and ActionAid notes that leading food and beverage companies' profits in 2 years are enough to cover the funding gap to provide life-saving food assistance in East Africa. The International Monetary Fund recently acknowledged corporate greed for profit has been a major contributor to the rise in prices, driving up the cost of living globally. Oxfam and ActionAid argue governments should impose a 50 to 90% tax on the profits of large corporations. The groups say this would generate hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue annually. That could benefit the people of the world. A new campaign aims to rally student loan borrowers against supporters of the Supreme Court debt forgiveness decision last week. Conservative Supreme Court justices ruled that President Joe Biden's plan to forgive up to $20,000 in debt for each eligible student borrower is unconstitutional. The Protect Borrowers Action campaign targets 13 House Republicans who have opposed student debt forgiveness. It will focus on more than a dozen Republican-held seats in contested districts, including those represented by Lauren Boebert, Scott Perry, and Don Bacon. These lawmakers urged the Supreme Court to throw out President Biden's debt relief plan. They argued that working people are burdened with student debt. Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers and a campaign supporter, says these lawmakers overlooked relief for billionaires. She says politicians need to hear loud and clear that they will be held accountable if they put the interests of billionaires ahead of their constituents' well-being. A poll by Data for Progress shows that 54% of U.S. voters support Biden's power under the Higher Education Act to provide relief to students. Newly proposed legislation would require Medicare to pay for home equipment for seniors and people with disabilities in the face of extreme weather. The Survival Aid for Emergencies, or SAFE through Medicare Act, was introduced by Senator Ed Markey and Representative Maxwell Frost. The bill would pay for appliances such as heat pumps, air conditioners, and solar batteries. These devices can help people stay safe during extreme weather events such as heat waves and power outages. Markey and Frost say that the bill is necessary because seniors and people with disabilities are more likely to die from heat-related illnesses or lose access to life-saving medications during a power outage. A 2020 study estimates that heat-related deaths amongst the elderly in the United States nearly doubled over the past 2 decades. A new study by Harvard Law School and New York University has found that the livestock industry poses a serious risk for future pandemics. The report is the first to comprehensively map the animal trade network that increases the risk of zoonotic diseases in the United States. It found the animal industry is not adequately regulated, and this can lead to pathogens spilling over and spreading. That leaves the public at constant risk of zoonotic diseases. The U.S. is the world's largest importer of live wildlife, and it produces more livestock than almost any other nation. Ann Linder, one of the report's lead authors, says the next pandemic could be far worse than COVID-19 and may come sooner than we think. An Israeli court has acquitted a police officer accused of recklessly killing an unarmed Palestinian man with autism in 2020. 32-year-old Iyad Halak was shot dead while walking in Israeli-separated East Jerusalem in May of that year. The officer shot him because he mistook him for an armed assailant. The Jerusalem District Court says the defendant was acquitted of the charges of negligent homicide. Halak's mother is calling the ruling a grave injustice. The court says that the officer committed an honest mistake because he thought he was dealing with an armed terrorist. Halak's family says that he was mentally an 8-year-old, and witnesses say that he panicked after being yelled at by the police. Halak then went into an alley where the officer shot him first in the leg and then in the chest. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has called Halak's death a war crime and an execution. UN officials condemn reports of sexual violence in the Sudan. A detailed segment coming up after the break. Stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages. Senior UN officials have condemned increasingly incidents of sexual violence in Sudan. They're calling for an immediate end to the violence and an independent investigation into the abuses. They say sexual violence is being used as a war tactic to terrorize people. In one case, up to 20 women were reportedly raped. Martin Griffiths, head of the UN Relief and Works Agency, says Sudan is witnessing not only a humanitarian crisis, but also a crisis of humanity. Volker Turk, head of the Human Rights Department, notes that women and girls receive little or no medical and psychosocial support after being brutalized. Sudan has seen renewed violence between the army and the paramilitary forces since April. France has repatriated 10 women and 25 children held in detention centers in Syria. It is believed these women voluntarily went to Syria and Iraq to join the terrorist group Daesh, also called ISIS. They were captured in 2019 when ISIS was defeated and have been ever since held in detention centers. While the women face trial, their children are being placed in child care facilities. This is the fourth repatriation operation in a year. Previously, France only repatriated orphans or children whose mothers had renounced their parental rights. The UN Committee Against Torture condemned France for not returning more women and children. A study predicts food inflation will rise 1 to 3 percentage points by 2035 due to global warming. The study conducted by Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and the European Central Bank examined inflation data from over 120 countries over 30 years. Researchers found a rise in temperature will increase food inflation because of the impact on agriculturally productivity. The study also found climate change will likely lead to a decline in economic growth, which will spur job losses and migration. Iraq will use $10 billion in frozen Iranian funds to send goods exempt from U.S. sanctions to Iran. Yahya Ali Ishaq is head of the joint Iran-Iraq Chamber of Commerce. He says these funds will be deposited with the Trade Bank of Iraq. Ishaq says that the two countries had agreed to use the money for trade in non-sanctioned goods, such as medicine. The Iraqi government owed Iran this amount mainly for the purchase of natural gas and electricity. But because of the U.S. banking sanctions, Iraq was unable to make direct payments. Despite its large oil and gas reserves, Iraq remains heavily dependent on Iran to meet its energy needs. Iraq imports 1/3 of its gas and electricity from Iran. Due to non-payment of its energy debts, Iran had cut its gas and electricity supplies to Iraq several times in recent years. Ishaq says the two countries could increase the volume of trade to $20 billion in the next few years. The bodies of more than 100 victims of the Srebrenica genocide have been lying in the morgue in Bosnia and Herzegovina for the past 28 years. The bodies are awaiting identification. Former head of Bosnia's Missing Persons Institute, Amor Masovic, says DNA from these unclaimed bodies was analyzed, but the samples could not be matched. He urged the government to arrange their proper burial. Bosnia and Herzegovina will abide for farewell. Voiceover redo. The bodies are awaiting identification. Former head of Bosnia's Missing Persons Institute, Amor Masovic, says DNA from these unclaimed bodies was analyzed, but the samples could not be matched. He urged the government to arrange their proper burial. Bosnia and Herzegovina will bid farewell to 30 more identified victims of the Srebrenica genocide on its 28th anniversary on Tuesday. The identified bodies will be buried in a memorial cemetery in Potokari, eastern Bosnia. Thousands of visitors from various countries will attend the funeral service and burials. The genocide claimed the lives of more than 8,000 people. Bosnian Muslims were killed after Bosnian Serb forces attacked the UN safe area of Srebrenica in July 1995. Dutch troops were tasked with acting as an international peacekeeping force in the region. Serb troops, led by General Ratko Mladic, who was sentenced to life for war crimes, overran the UN zone. The bodies of the genocide victims were found in over 500 different parts of the country. Since the Taliban regained power in Afghanistan in 2021, the film and TV serial industry has come to a nearly grinding halt. The new rulers have imposed severe restrictions on broadcasting. Many production houses have closed and left. Many people are unemployed. But social media has helped a number of producers keep the industry alive. One production company, Nema Resan, has taken to YouTube to produce TV serials. Its director and producer, Mohammad Taqi Haidari, says that the Taliban administration had extended the work permit. He notes that this has raised hopes that Afghan authorities might allow the revival of cinema after 2 years. Haidari is calling on the Taliban to lift the restrictions on those women and the broadcasting of TV serials. China has opened the historic Eidgah Mosque in the ancient city of Kashgar in East Turkestan to tourists. Yet it has banned local Uyghurs from praying at the mosque. Media reports say authorities have begun selling tickets to tourists to visit the mosque in northwest China. The house of the worship has been largely closed for worship since 2016 due to a strict government crackdown on religious activities. Authorities only allow small groups of elderly worshippers to pray during Ramadan and other Islamic holy days. The mosque damage and closure is part of a broad campaign of repression to eradicate Uyghurs' religious practices and culture. About 16,000 mosques are believed to have been destroyed or damaged as a result of government policies. An estimated 1.8 million Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities have been arbitrarily detained in detainment camps and prisons. Bangladesh has pledged to support the International Criminal Court's investigation into possible crimes committed by the Burmese military against the Rohingya. ICC prosecutor Karim Khan visited the coastal city of Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh this week to meet with Rohingya refugees and gather evidence. More than 1 million Rohingya currently live in the city's camps after fleeing violence and persecution in Burma's Rakhine state nearly 6 years ago. Bangladesh Foreign Minister A.K. Abdul Momen met with Khan and assured him of his nation's support in the investigation. The ICC has jurisdiction over some Rohingya-related crimes. The Rohingya community in Cox's Bazar has expressed frustration with the lack of progress in their case before the ICC. In 2018, an independent UN fact-finding mission found the Burmese military committed mass killings and gang rapes of Rohingya Muslims. The Rohingya want the ICC to continue its investigation and hold Burma's military accountable for its crimes. The ICC issued an arrest warrant for President Vladimir Putin in March for war crimes in the Ukraine. Rohingya activists say that their case predates Ukraine. That's all from our Washington, D.C. studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can follow us on YouTube and do click the bell icon for more updates. You can always watch more content on Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.